Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Athletic School podcast. Today, we brought our guest speaker, Bob Cymber, to talk about Stoicism. If you guys follow the Athletic School, you guys probably know that I'm in love with the Stoicism. I think we have a lot to benefit from that, even if we are not athletes, but especially athletes, because we go through so many different situations in our daily life. So I'm glad to have Bob to talk to us. Which he's a coach for Stoicism, right, Bob? You teach Stoicism 101 and stuff like that.
Yes. I do have those programs for one-on-one training. Yes, that's
All
correct.
right, awesome. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are gonna be interested on that afterwards. So Bob, just to begin with, what is Stoicism? What is this? Is it a religion like so many people think? What is it?
So it's actually not a religion, Igor, and thanks for having me, by the way. Stoicism is a philosophy that was first founded in about 300, maybe mid 350 BCE by a Greek shipping merchant named Zeno.
Mhm.
And as the legend goes, as you know, there is a lot of legend involved around Roman and Greek history. The legend goes he's a successful merchant. One day he gets shipwrecked and he loses everything, right? I mean, we've all been in scenarios where we thought that we've hit rock bottom in some way. And so what happened is that after Zeno lost everything, he went and actually encountered a bookstore, a bookstall at the in the city, and that's where he encountered Xenophon's Memorabilia, which is a very famous philosophical work that talks about Socrates. Plato was another, obviously, one of the most famous, arguably, of Socrates' students, but Xenophon was also another big recorder of the man, the myth, the legend, Socrates, and what he taught. And that really started the Stoic school from there. As you probably already know, and maybe some of your listeners know, Stoicism actually means painted porch, and that's where Zeno and all of his followers went to talk and discuss philosophy, and Stoicism was born out of that tradition.
Yeah, man, that's cool. I wish we could just go back there and see how it was. Just it's crazy how long ago that was and how much wisdom was involved. Like how like, oh, let's just gather here and talk about this kind of stuff. And for me, that's awesome. Um, so I know that the Stoicism has like the four virtues, right? Which is justice, wisdom, temperance, and courage. Correct me if I'm wrong, please.
No,
But
that's right.
could you talk about those a little bit?
So the four virtues are really this idea about what constitutes a good and virtuous life. Virtue is this sort of underlying notion of the correct behavior, the correct ethical actions that a person should have, right? And so you were very correct. You were absolutely correct about the four virtues. Those stemmed from this idea that we should develop our character as far as how we relate to the world. And the beautiful thing about Stoicism and the four virtues is that all of the practices, and you see this with all the Roman, the newer, quote unquote, newer philosophers, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, the more well known writers,
Yeah.
you see that they have this sort of perspective of becoming disillusioned and disenchanted about how emotions can affect the normal train of thought. And you probably know this too, is that as an athlete, as someone, as a soccer player, as a footballer, as Europeans
Yeah.
like to say, and
Yeah.
Brazilians
Yeah.
like to say, you go through these maybe bits of nervousness before a game, where that's the virtue of fortitude, or of courage is another term for that you would have to go through in order to play the match, right? That to encounter that nervousness. The beautiful thing about living the virtuous life from a Stoic perspective with the virtues is that it really tries to line up rational beings, line up humans in a way that we come to terms with our experiences in a way that do not cause inner disturbances or anxiety or depression or all these negative, quote unquote, negative emotions that we receive. And so the four virtues are these sort of prescriptions that the Stoics give as medication for all of these horrible everyday experiences that humans seem to have, especially even like today is probably just as worse as it was back then with all the distractions that we have. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned about emotions, and I feel a lot of people talking about. So we had a class. I can't remember which class it was, and then we are talking about. I think it was Seneca, and then he was talking about emotions, and people were kind of saying like, "Oh, I don't want to be a Stoic because they don't have emotions," or I shouldn't use my emotions at all, and always use the reason side of it. So what the Stoics like think about emotions and reason? Like, should we use emotions at all? Should we not? How should we deal with that?
Yeah. And it's really, it's good that you bring up the fact that people attribute Stoicism to not having emotions.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that common misconception is that the term Stoic to mean unfeeling or cold-hearted really didn't come into the English language until about the 15th century AD or the CE era. And in order to dispel that, really getting at the root of Stoicism is the fact that it's not an elimination of emotions. I heard Massimo Pigliucci, one of the modern Stoics that you might be familiar with. Actually, I think he's been on your show. Correct me if I'm wrong. Have you had Massimo on your show? Not yet. Not yet. Okay, well, soon maybe.
Yeah.
He actually talks about this this idea that Stoicism is about decreasing the effect of negative emotions and maximizing the effects of positive emotions. So it's not a complete elimination. It's just a little bit of triage. It's a little bit of eliminating and avoiding those harmful encounters that we might have, and maximizing and really encouraging ourselves to chase after those positive ones, the reinforcing ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like what you said, because I feel like a lot of people think there's like Stoics, they don't feel anything, and like I think that's just impossible for us as human beings. And I feel like Stoicism is more like, okay, what I'm gonna do about that? What do I do with this emotion? Like, should I hold on to that, or should I just let it go? And I think that's when Stoicism is so rich in that kind of wisdom and knowledge, because it teaches how to deal with these emotions. Like, there are things that makes me upset, but then it's when I think, well, should I get upset for that, or should I let it go? And then I love the idea when they say that everything is neutral. It's how you judge things.
Yeah, and that sort of, you said the interpretation of what to do with the emotions, and I think that really gets to why Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, in a lower, lesser case, Seneca, but he still talks about it, having correct judgments, right? You see it all the time in Meditations and in Epictetus and Discourses and the Enchiridion, or the Handbook, as it's also known as. You see this idea that the rational human has a filter that can filter out all of these sort of misinterpretations that we can have about things. Mm-hmm. And if you really look at it, Igor, that's really, if you evaluate all the negative emotions and whatever those emotions are, even as an athlete, those, as I referenced, the bouts of nervousness you might have before an important match, for an example, all of those types of negative emotions stem from errors that we make with that filter that we evaluate things with. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the interesting things that, for me, in applying Stoicism in my life, that's something that I've had to come to terms with as well.
Yeah. So could you give us an example on like what a Stoic would do in I don't know, in a certain situation of stress? Not even talking about athletes right now, but like just in general, so like how I would use justice, temperance, wisdom, and courage in my daily life as just a regular person, as a human being.
Well, I think when dealing with stress, not as an athlete, but just stress of having a full schedule, that doesn't necessarily just apply to athletes, right? It can apply to any person, any working person, definitely, even by default, a human who would live like the cynics is just looking for food. There can be stress involved in even that simple way of life, right? Just because you're not in this sort of modern developed environment, this modern developed country, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't deal with these types of environmental stressors, right?
Mm.
But really, one of the things that I thought of when you said how does a Stoic use the four virtues with stress, the exercise that I love to use just kind of as an outset, the first thing that I go to is the Stoic idea of the view from above. That one's a very de-stressor for me. And if your listeners don't know, the view from above is this idea that if you can sort of view your events from a detached overhead, almost like a bird's eye view, and if you take into account the vast age of the universe and the vast timeline of human existence, really the stressors and the stress that we're dealing with right now, it's really not that big of a deal when we compare it to the age and the totality of human history. It's really not that big of a deal. And I feel like from that first step, you can then do a lot of other Stoic techniques, such as the stripping method, where it's taking an object and stripping it down to its bare bone materials. Epictetus gives this example of when you're at a banquet, at a dinner, and you get this, actually, I think it's Marcus Aurelius who does this, but he gets it like a very lavish meal. That's a fish dish, right? And he views the fish as not this fancy, luxurious thing. This is simply a dead fish on a plate. I mean, that's kind of a weird example, I guess you would say. But once you start applying it to having a nice car, you don't necessarily attribute luxury to it. All of a sudden now it's just four wheels that gets you from point A to point B, right? So that's another helpful technique to use as well with stress.
Yeah, no, I love I have just been thinking about the view from above, because just talking to my friends and thinking about all stress, all the problems we have, and like I'm trying to see the things, not only the view from above, but like see from like if my life was a movie, how would be thinking about that, like, oh, am I crying up for this? Like that's so small. Like I don't want to be the type of person, So that's a really good example, and I love that. So bringing that to the sports side of it. So some examples that I can give to you that I've been through. And I want to ask you how was the best way to deal with that. So like I'm a goalkeeper for soccer, so it's like one player only. Yeah. And so like how should I deal with a mistake that happens in a game, which is like if I made a mistake, well, it's a goal, it's 1-0 for the other team. What can I do about it? Like what should I think in that moment? And some other, even like other examples, like what if I'm not playing, because that happens to me, well, like I was mentioning to you before, in Kansas, here as well in Ohio, like there was games that I didn't play, seasons that I didn't play at all, and which I think I learned a lot from that. But like for someone that is going through that right now, what are the best things that they can do, things that they can think about it, to go through those obstacles?
Specifically, and this might be too specific, if we're talking about a position in a athletic scenario where you are playing the role, maybe as with a team, but with a very important role, like goalkeeper, like you're that one, like you said, you're the one man sort of gatekeeper of, high stakes, right? The ball gets in, it's 1-0. It might be, you might be a lone tennis player of just doing one-on-ones instead of like doubles, right? In those scenarios, it's really important, I think, to really broaden the circle of observation that you have. The Stoics have this idea of the cosmopolis, which is this conception that it tries to eliminate identity, your identity to other people, your differences, I should say. That's probably a better term, your differences compared to other people. Marcus Aurelius, even being the Roman emperor, co-emperor with his adopted brother, one of the amazing things that you see from his writings is his attempt to eliminate his differences between himself and his enemies. You see it between him warring with the Sarmatians. You see him doing it with the other wars that he dealt with. And by the way, here's a really good plug for if you guys have not read Verissimus by Donald Robertson, the new graphic novel. It's fantastic. I learned a ton about Marcus from that. It's really good. But anyways, other than that, as far as eliminating the differences between you and others, it's really important in these individual roles to broaden your perspective to include who's really influencing you and how are you influencing other people. Because you as a goalkeeper, for example, you have to know the formations of the team, right? I know I'm not really big on football, but I know there's different like defensive formations. There's different like how many strikers are in the front, how many midfield, right? Like there's different formations of the field. And so you really have to be sort of a jack of all trades. You have to know the ins and outs about how you are influencing the formation and how in return they influence your performance. Mm-hmm. So it's not single-sided. That's kind of the key point. It's not a very narrow focus on my role is this, I need to do this. There is that sort of part of Stoicism where you need to take self-responsibility and be disciplined, but it's not at the cost of noticing your relationship to other people and seeing how you influence them and how they in turn influence you. There's actually a very similar proverb in Proverbs, a biblical metaphor that talks about this. It says, just like iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, right? And that's sort of the same idea that the Stoics had with how people are meant to live and work together well with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned books, you mentioned so many different authors and different people. And something that I feel like athletes especially they don't do a lot, it's reading. What is your thoughts or even the Stoics thoughts about reading? Like is it important or like is it nowadays it's not a thing anymore? Like what do you think about that?
It's interesting that you asked because I saw on your Instagram that you posted about, what was it, LeBron in a library, like reading a book or something like that. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think it's critical, man. It's and throwing out maybe any potential bias that I have, as a writer, as a former English teacher, in order to get more perspectives in your life, in order to enlarge your familiarity with the world and to experience it, I don't really think there's any other way that gives you the same sort of impact as the written word. Yes, audiobooks do, podcasts, those of you who are listening right now, definitely. I'm not saying, you should shut down this podcast and go pick up, necessarily pick up a book right now. But it really is important in order to have a sort of quiet environment where you are focused on the linguistic message of what an author is transmitting to you. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of this comic that I think it was from like Charlie Brown or something like that. He had like a test the next day and he didn't have enough time to study and he went to sleep. Charlie Brown did on like this stack of textbooks, right? And the little bubble said, "Oh, I hope that in the morning I'll have all the knowledge from these books," right? The work doesn't do itself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the key point. And the written word is just so profound and so saturated with beneficial ideas. And don't get me wrong, there are some harmful ideas, but it's not necessarily that you need to take and apply bad ideas. It's that you need to notice negative ideas when they come about.
Yeah.
So there is sort of a good, obviously when talking about, someone who's very infamous, like, Hitler's Mein Kampf. Obviously that's an unethical thing to put that into practice, but it's a good thing to expose yourself to know that this is an example for me to avoid. Just like Marcus Aurelius says in the Meditations, the best revenge is not to be like my enemy, but you have to know your enemy first. And that actually is a very good comparison to watching tapes as an athlete. If whether you're playing an opponent, if you need to be exposed to those ideas, even though it's not like trying to learn new technique or trying to make it's not you training and by running X amount of miles on a treadmill, but it's knowledge that you gain in order to make your game better overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said everything. I think the perspective that we get from books, it's totally different. Like you cannot get that from a podcast. You might be able to, I'm not saying you are not going to, but I think just the stillness that you have to sit down and read, the impact and like I cannot even explain because I feel like when I'm sitting down and I'm reading something and something clicks on my mind, it's just like there's no other feeling similar, So I love that, and I really hope that's the kind of the idea of the athletic school. Of course, we want to share some knowledge, but we also want to encourage people to go get more knowledge as well. Because I think you can learn so much from books than just Instagram reels. Even if you just follow the best, even if you follow the athletic school, I think you can get a lot from meditations, stuff like that. So yeah, no, I think that's awesome. We're talking about in something of some things that I think about the Stoicism, and I always try to in my head I always have that idea like, oh, what Marcus Aurelius would think about that, what the Stoics think about that. So seeing a lot of people talking about the law of attraction,
Yes.
and like I know the Stoicism, like they say like, oh, you should always even try to see what can go wrong, and that kind of goes a little bit against the law of attraction because you think about things that can go wrong. Me personally, I like them both. I think both work. I think the law of attraction works, but I also think you should be prepared for things not going the way you want. But what are the Stoics talking about there right now, like in this war? Because I'm guessing Marcus Aurelius wasn't familiar with the law of attraction. So and nowadays I feel like these two ideas, they always conflict a little bit, and especially because now people, they just don't have a filter to see, should I take this or should I take that? Should I think this way? Should I think that way? So what are your thoughts on the law of attraction using Stoicism as well?
Actually, I was just going to ask you about, maybe some people don't know, and actually I'm not an expert on the law of attraction at all. Could you maybe just give an overview of what the law of attraction is?
I mean, so there's this movie called The Secret on Netflix that I highly recommend about that. So the law of attraction is basically like, it's all about positivity. So like if I think or if I say good things, those things will happen. I'm gonna attract those things. The same way, if I say negative things, if I think negative things, they will come to me the same way. And I feel like the Stoics, they are just more like, well, I don't care about that. I'm gonna just get ready for whatever it comes. Which, me personally, I love that because I used the law of attraction so many times and it worked. But at the same time, like different times, it didn't work, And Like sometimes I wasn't prepared, sometimes I was prepared. So like what are your thoughts on like thinking everything about just positivity and nothing negative at all?
I'm so glad that you said that, because I definitely had the wrong definition of what the law of attraction was. So thank you, Igor, for that. And one of the things that I think Stoicism, if there is a weakness to it, one of the things that I think that the law of attraction tries to, or just naturally does, provide that Stoicism can seemingly lack, is this notion of joy. Not necessarily positivity, but joy, and really getting excited about life. Sort of the way that Marcus Aurelius and sort of does. I don't know if you recall, there's a passage in Meditations where Marcus Aurelius notices, he gives the description of elderly people and children, how they can be very charming, and how the flecks on a boar's mouth can be beautiful. You get little hints of joy here and there in Stoicism about nature and what's happening.
Yeah.
But the thing that and also another close thing that probably comes to this about giving Stoicism joy and exploring it is William Irvine's book, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy, which gets pretty close. But one of the things that is widely missing is that sort of exhilaration about life, that sort of excitement that comes. You said earlier that a common misconception about Stoicism is that it seems very cold, right? And people think that it is.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Stoicism really is a philosophy of joy. But it's harder to find those passages in the texts because there's not as many of them.
Yeah.
But it really is a philosophy that can create that sort of, not like you said, not waiting for the situation and then dealing with it, but actually being optimistic even before the situation happens. There is a tendency, though, and Epictetus would be a huge stickler on this because he's so big about your impulsive actions and with appearances and impressions. But one of the things that the Stoic would advise against something like the law of attraction would to be to make sure that that feeling of joy and that sort of positivity doesn't lead you down an unvirtuous path that gets you into vice. And people define that term vice is very loaded today as well. A lot of people, they have the traditional concept of Christianity's 7 deadly sins. Is this a vice? But I think Stoicism really applies vices and negative things to us much broader, and not just those things, but gluttony, immoderation, right? It goes against the virtue, but also not using objects for their true purpose. You probably know about Stoicism and the physics. The Stoics had this sort of scientific theory about physics, about how the world worked. And they would say, if you use an object the way it's not supposed to be used, that's an unjust action.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the comparison I would make with Stoicism and something like the law of attraction.
Right. Cool. And you were talking about joy. And another thing that always conflicts in my mind is when we talk about success a little bit, and especially bringing to sports, we talk a lot about winning. And I've been reading. I'm reading right now. Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday, and he mentions a lot about. I mean, I guess the Stoic community talks a lot about like so there's this guy that's like oh, do you see how much I don't know, how much money he has or something like that, like you're never gonna have that. And then the guy said, well, but he will never have something that I'll have, which is enough for me. It's enough, like so the idea that like to decide when is enough. But when we bring to sports, it's a little bit different, because if I decide that I just I'm a good keeper right now, I'm gonna go keeper right now, I'm probably gonna stop practicing because I'm good enough. So I'm just not gonna do anymore. So that conflicts in my head a little bit. So what the Stoics think about success in like in a general idea?
I love how you bring up the concept of never having enough. I have to admit I have not read. You said it's the obstacle is the way, right? That's the one you're.
No, stillness is the key.
Stillness is the key. That's another one of his. Got it. So I've not read Stillness is the key, but the interesting thing that you bring up about this idea that someone who has a lot of money might not have something else that he might lack something that someone else has. I remember thinking, reading one of the Donald Robertson's book about cognitive behavioral therapy, a brilliant, very, very heavy and analytical book. It's not for it's for someone who wants to do an academic like investigation, very heavy read. But in it, he talks about this idea called hedonistic adaptation. And it's this concept for humans, psychologically speaking, when we get pleasures, whether it's a lot of money, luxury, sexual situations, good food constantly and at common intervals, there's this trigger inside us that our tolerance for that stuff, it requires more goods to fill it in order to get that same euphoria or high from whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
Our tolerance is affected, right? We become more tolerant to things, and so we need more. And so one of the things that the Stoics can help out with about this sort of conflicting thing you have about constantly wanting to be better, but realizing where I am in the stage of life. I think it really comes to from the Stoic concept of living according to nature. Mm-hmm. Living according to nature is this concept that since we as human beings have this sort of rationalistic ability, we can reason, we have this logical ability, we have this sort of unique place in the universe. And not only that, we have our sort of sub nature, which for you is being a good soccer player, right? For me, it's being a good coach. For someone else, it might be a good clerk at the gas station. Whatever it is that's your sort of characteristics, in order to do it well, that's really what it requires. Mm-hmm. Now, then the complication comes to you, for example, of when am I a good goalkeeper? That's something that the individual has to struggle to answer based on what they notice and self-evaluation with their lives as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think what you said, like, I think it's bringing like the going back to nature, living according to nature. I think that's an important thing, and I haven't thought about that. And I think that's good because you can apply that to different aspects in your life, so you can use that. Okay, as a soccer player, I need to get better, but as I don't know, eating Oreos, maybe that's enough, maybe like I'm not supposed to be eating that, stuff like that. Simple things.
Those Oreos, man.
Right, I know it's hard to stop, but so yeah, no, so I think that's a really good thing. And I think for us as an athlete, it's like you mentioned again, having that self-evaluation, which I think is important for everyone. That view from above, it's also comes together, comes along, because I think that's that can make a difference for everyone to keep growing. We actually had I think, I don't know, maybe at the beginning of the year, we had a challenge. It was get uncomfortable challenge, which you need to do something uncomfortable, and we brought the Stoic idea from Marcus Aurelius that he used to sleep on the floor to feel uncomfortable and create that mental strength, like used to fast, try to go to cold and heat temperature and exposure to, just to create that mental strength again. Try physical challenge and things like that. So I think that's awesome. So yeah, thanks so much, Bob, for all the information you gave us. For people that wanted to learn more about the Stoicism, what are some books, podcasts, what some things that they can do so they can learn more about it, so they can get more into it? What are some your advice?
For for me, I think one of the most digestible reads for someone just getting into Stoicism is Massimo Pigliucci's book, How to Be a Stoic. It's very approachable. Like I said about, it's the exact opposite of what the Dal Robertson deep, heavy read that I mentioned earlier. Another one, here's a fascinating one, and I mentioned it already, is it just came out, is that graphic novel. It's the first of its kind about Stoicism. I wish I had it. Oh, actually, I do have it. I'm looking at my shelf. I've got everything all over the place. But it's called Verissimus, and it's a graphic novel about Marcus Aurelius's life, but from a Stoic perspective. Like, what is the Stoic things that he did? I mean, it's just peppered and littered with all of those.
Yeah.
So that I would definitely start with those two. If you like multimedia and stuff like that, if you like sort of, if you like self-paced courses, you can I have one that I created for free that people can check out at stoiccoach.net. And there's like a little free course tab that you can do, and it's completely free. There's even like downloadable notes you can do. And that's really just to get more people in order to get people involved in Stoicism and really help people with mental health, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I'll make sure I'll put that link on the description. But well, I think that's it. I'm sure some other questions will raise in my mind once I'm re-listening to the podcast and thinking about it. But yeah, Bob, thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting the invite. Like I said before, I think people can benefit a lot from that, especially athletes.
Yeah, Igor, and again, thanks for reaching out. And yeah, we'll have to do this again soon.
For sure. Thank you so much.